The hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the deck plates, a relentless reminder that they were adrift in the void. Captain Ilara Voss gripped the console, her knuckles paling against the worn metal. At 38, she was the steadiest hand on the Harmony, a mid-sized explorer vessel charting the fringes of known space. Her crew, 3 souls total, relied on that steadiness, especially now, with stars streaking past in silent judgment. "Status on the comms array?" Ilara asked, her voice slicing through the dim-lit bridge like a blade. She didn't turn from the viewport, where the nebula's glow painted the glass in bruised purples. Jax Harlan, the engineer, wiped grease from his brow with a rag that had seen better days. He was wiry, quick with a joke even when things soured, but today his usual spark had dimmed. "Still nothing, Cap. The relays are fried. Some kind of interference from that last jump. No signals in, no signals out. We're ghosts out here." Beside him, Dr. Lena Kai hunched over a flickering holoscreen, her fingers dancing across the interface. The xenobiologist was the cautious one, always double-checking data before leaping to conclusions. Her dark hair fell in a loose braid, and she pushed it back with an impatient flick. "It's not just comms. The internal audio systems are glitching too." Speakers buzzed then cut out. Like the ships forgetting how to resonate. Ilara finally swiveled her chair, meeting their eyes. The Harmony was their home, a relic from Earth's golden age of expansion, built for discovery. They'd been on a routine survey of the Orion Arm when the warp drive hiccuped, spitting them into uncharted territory. No alarms had blared, ironic given the problem, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any klaxon. "Run diagnostics again," Ilara said, standing. Her boots echoed softly on the grating. "We need to know if this is local or if the whole sector's gone quiet." Jax nodded, cracking his knuckles. "On it. But if it's interference, we might need to vent the core for a reset. Risky in open space." Lena glanced up, her brow furrowed. "And what if it's not mechanical? The nebula's readings show anomalous energy patterns, almost like a dampening field. I've seen echoes of this in old logs from the Void Wars, but those were weaponized. This feels natural. Or worse, intentional." The bridge door hissed open behind them, admitting Mira Voss, Ilara's younger sister and the ship's pilot. At 25, Mira was the bold heart of the crew, her optimism a counterweight to Lena's prudence. She carried a steaming mug of synth coffee, handing it to Ilara without a word. "Heard the chatter from the galley. Everything okay up here? Feels too quiet without the usual banter." Ilara took the mug, the warmth seeping into her palms. "Quiet's the issue, Mira. Comms are down, audio's failing. We're cut off." Mira leaned against the bulkhead, crossing her arms. Her flight suit was patched from a dozen close calls, each stitch a story of grit. "Then we improvise. Plot a course back to the jump point? Or hail the nearest beacon manually?" Jax snorted, though there was no real humor in it. "Manually? With what semaphore flags? The array's toast." The ship lurched subtly, a ripple through the hull that set the lights flickering. Ilara steadied herself on the console, spilling a drop of coffee. In that instant, the nebula outside seemed to pulse, its colors deepening to an inky violet. No sound accompanied it, no warning tone, no hum of straining metal. Just the void pressing in. "Diagnostics complete," Lena announced, her voice tight. "It's not us. The entire electromagnetic spectrum in this region is suppressed. No radio waves, no subspace chatter. It's like the cosmos hit mute." Ilara set the mug down, her mind racing. They trained for isolation, but this was different. The Harmony carried enough supplies for months, but without contact, rescue was a fantasy. And deeper in the cargo hold waited their true cargo, the resonance core, an experimental device meant to amplify signals across light years, inspired by humanity's ancient love for music and vibration. If even that failed, "We adapt," Ilara said, her tone brooking no argument. Jax prepped the EVA suits. Lena mapped the interference gradient. "Mira, you and I will check the core manually. If it's a field, we find its edge." The crew moved as one, a well-oiled machine born of years together. But as they dispersed, Ilara caught Myra's eye, a flicker of doubt mirroring her own. Out here, silence wasn't just absence. It was a predator waiting to swallow them whole. Captain Alara Voss gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles whitening against the cold metal. The hum of the ship's engines had faded to a whisper hours ago, leaving only the faint creak of the hull expanding in the void. She glanced at her crew, 3 souls in this tin can hurtling toward the edge of known space. Jax, the engineer, hunched over his toolkit, his wiry frame taut with frustration as he probed the silent comms array. Mira, the xenolinguist, paced the cramped bridge, her sharp eyes darting between readouts that meant nothing without sound. "We've been dark for 12 hours, Alara said, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. She wasn't one for panic, grit had carried her through worse than a glitch. But this wasn't just silence, it was absence. No static, no beeps, no resonance from the stars themselves. The cosmos had gone mute and their ship, the Harmony, was adrift in it. Jack straightened, wiping grease from his brow. "It's not the relays. I rerouted power twice. Whatever hit us, it scrubbed the frequencies clean. Like someone turned down the volume on the universe." Mira stopped pacing, her cautious nature kicking in as she leaned against the viewport. Stars wheeled silently outside in different pinpricks. Or everything. Remember the logs from the outpost? They reported the same before they vanished, sound waves damping out one by one. We thought it was interference from the nebula. But if it's systemic? Alara cut her off with a raised hand. Speculation won't fix it. Jax, what's our backup? The acoustic drives? He shook his head, his witty edge dulled by exhaustion. Those rely on vibrational feedback from the engines. Without sound propagation, they're as useful as a drum in a vacuum. We can't even hear our own propulsion anymore. The challenge loomed larger than the nebula ahead. A resource shortage not of fuel or air, but of the very medium that bound their tech together. The Harmony's systems were built on sonic principles, a human ingenuity that mimicked the universe's hidden symphonies. Now that edge was turning against them. One wrong maneuver and they'd drift forever, unheard and unseen. Alara pushed off the console, her brave resolve hardening. Then we adapt. Mira, pull the cultural archives. Anything on silent communication. Old Earth sign languages, visual signals. Jax, strip the comms for parts. We build something new. Mira nodded, her fingers already flying over the haptic interface, pulling up holographic projections of ancient gestures. But as the images flickered to life, a low tremor vibrated through the deck, not sound but felt in their bones. The nebula loomed closer, its gaseous swirls a silent storm waiting to swallow them whole. Jax cursed under his breath, tools clattering. "Captain, that ripple, it's pulling us in. Without thruster feedback, I can't calibrate." Tension coiled in the air, thick as the nebula's haze. Alara's mind raced, piecing together fragments of half-remembered physics. Humans had conquered silence before, in the deep oceans or barren deserts. This was just another frontier. "Mark positions with the emergency flares," she ordered. "Visual beacons only. We'll navigate by sight and gut." As Jax complied, firing silent bursts of light into the void, Myra's projection stabilized on a pattern, rhythmic flashes from wartime codes. "This could work," she murmured, her voice a fragile anchor. "But if the damping field intensifies..." It already was. The ship's lights dimmed fractionally, the tremor growing into a steady pull. Alara strapped into the pilot's chair, her hands steady on the manual controls. No symphony of alerts, just the press of her will against the stars. They edged forward, the nebula's edge brushing their shields like a thief's whisper. Hours blurred into a tense vigil. Jax jury-rigged a basic visual relay, linking the console to external cams with fiber optics. No waves, just pure light. Mira decoded the flare patterns, mapping a safe vector through the gas clouds. But the cost mounted, power reserves dipped as they burned extra energy on illumination, and fatigue gnawed at their edges. A sudden lurch bucked the ship, the nebula's gravity well snaring them unexpectedly. Alarms flashed mutely, red strobes painting their faces. "Hold on." Alara barked, wrestling the yoke. The Harmony groaned, twisting away by inches. Jax's face paled. "We lost a panel, hull breach in engineering. Sealing it now, but we're venting Atmo." Myra's eyes widened, her caution flaring into action. She grabbed a sealant kit, dashing toward the hatch. "I'll patch from this side. Keep her steady." Elara nodded, sweat beading on her forehead. The stakes sharpened, lose the ship, and they were ghosts in the silence. But as Mira worked, her hands flashing in improvised signals to Jax through the bulkhead view, a spark of camaraderie ignited. Humans, stubborn and inventive, refusing to fade out. The breach sealed with a hiss they couldn't hear but felt as relief. They pulled free of the nebula's grasp, scarred but intact. Yet the damping persisted, a lingering shadow hinting at greater voids ahead. Elara exhaled, scanning the readouts. One step forward, but the music of the cosmos remained forgotten, for now. Elena gripped the railing of the observation deck, her knuckles whitening against the cold metal. The stars outside the viewport stretched into an endless, mocking silence, their light flickering without the hum of engines or the faint vibration of life support to accompany them. Marco was beside her, fiddling with a handheld scanner that beeped erratically in the vacuum-sealed quiet. "This thing's picking up harmonics we shouldn't even have instruments for," he muttered, his voice a low rumble that barely cut through the oppressive hush. Lila hovered at the console behind them, her fingers dancing over holographic displays, eyes narrowed in that cautious squint she wore when the math didn't add up. The anomaly had started small. 3 days ago the ship's music archive had glitched, symphonies unraveling into static whispers before vanishing entirely. They'd laughed it off at first, blaming a solar flare. But then voices began to fade mid-sentence, words dissolving like mist, leaving only the shape of mouths moving in the dim light. Now, communication relied on text pads and gestures, a primitive dance that grated on Elena's nerves. She signed sharply to Marco, *deeper scan. Core frequencies. He nodded, syncing the scanner to the ship's quantum resonator. The device whirred to life, but instead of data streams, it projected a faint ripple in the air, a visual echo of sound waves that weren't there. Lila typed furiously, "It's not just our systems. The cosmos is damping acoustic propagation. Like the universe forgot how to carry vibration." Her words hung on the screen, stark against the glow. Elena pushed off the railing, her boots magnetizing to the deck with a dull thud that echoed only in her mind. They needed to reach the outer array, a satellite pod drifting a kilometer off the hull, to recalibrate the comms buoy. If they could boost a signal through the dampening field, maybe they'd punch a hole back to the network. But the pod's thrusters were finicky, and with sound gone, coordinating the EVA would be a nightmare. No radio chatter, no proximity alerts. Marco suited up first, his movements exaggerated for clarity, thumbs-up signaling readiness. Elena followed, sealing her helmet with a twist that clicked silently. Lila stayed inside, monitoring vitals through the tether line. As they cycled through the airlock, the void greeted them with its eternal blankness. Elena's suit lights cut harsh beams across the hull, illuminating the scarred plating from their last asteroid dodge. Marco jetted ahead, his form silhouetted against the starfield, gesturing back with a wave. Halfway to the pod, the first glitch hit. Elena's thruster sputtered, a brief burst that sent her spinning lazily toward the ship's shadow. She corrected with a manual puff, heart pounding in the cocoon of her suit, but Marco was already drifting off course, his lights weaving erratic patterns. No alarms blared, the silence amplified every imagined creak of her suit. She flashed her wrist light in Morse, short, long, short, anchor me. He responded with a steady beam, reeling in the tether until they stabilized. Docking at the pod was a clumsy affair. Marco wedged his mag boots into place and pried open the access panel, exposing a nest of conduits that should have hummed with power. Instead, they lay dormant, coated in an unnatural frost that sparkled under their lights. Elena leaned in, her gloved hand tracing the frozen lines. The dampening field was here too, crystallizing the very medium of sound. She signed to Marco, bypass the vocal relay. Route through visual spectrum. He pulled a toolkit from his belt, splicing cables with deliberate snaps. Lila's text flooded their helmet displays. Incoming data spike. Something's resonating, hold. The pod trembled faintly, a vibration Elena felt through her boots rather than heard. Marco's eyes widened behind his visor. He pointed to the console, where a holographic wave began to form, jagged and alien. As the splice connected, a low thrum built, not in their ears but in their chests like the ghost of a bass note. The stars seemed to pulse in rhythm, and for a split second, Elena swore she caught a fragment of melody faint as a dream. But then it shattered. The pod's lights flared red, emergency protocols kicking in without a siren, and Marco was flung back, his tether snapping taut. Elena lunged, grabbing his arm just as the array overloaded, spewing sparks that died silently in the vacuum. They hauled back to the airlock, battered and empty-handed. Lila was waiting, her face pale as she helped them inside. The text pad blinked. Asterisk, it almost worked. But the field adapted. We're losing more than music now. Structural integrity's at 87%. Asterisk, Elena stripped off her helmet, the rush of recycled air hitting her face like a whisper. The challenge wasn't just silence. It was the universe rewriting itself, and their clever fix had only made it hungrier. Elena gripped the railing of the observation deck, her knuckles whitening as the stars blurred past the viewport. The ship's hum was the only sound left in their world, a mechanical drone that Jack swore was getting fainter by the hour. Mira hovered nearby, her tablet clutched like a shield, fingers dancing over the screen in silent calculations. They had been chasing the silence for weeks now, that creeping void where cosmic frequencies should sing. No radio waves, no stellar winds whispering through sensors. Just emptiness pressing in like a held breath. "Captain," Jack said, his voice cutting through the quiet with its usual edge. He leaned against the console, tools dangling from his belt like forgotten ornaments. "The modulator's holding, but it's fighting us. Whatever's out there, it's not just muting signals, it's erasing the patterns we need to rebuild them." Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on the nebula ahead, a swirling mass of gas that should have crackled with electromagnetic fury. Instead it loomed silent, a ghost in the void. Their mission was simple at the start. Map the outer rim, catalog the universe's hidden symphonies for the archives back on Earth. But 3 days ago the first probe had gone dark, its last transmission a flat line of static. Now with the ship's own comms faltering, the stakes clawed higher. One wrong maneuver and they'd be adrift, voices lost to the cosmos. Mira stepped forward, her cautious nature showing in the way she measured each word. The readings from the core sample were missing harmonics. It's like the fabric of space is damping vibrations at the quantum level. If we push the engines harder to skirt the nebula, we risk amplifying the effect on ourselves. Jack snorted, wiping grease from his hands on his jumpsuit. Or we adapt. I've got a jury rig from the auxiliary bay, old sonic emitters tuned to human speech frequencies. It'll broadcast a pulse, maybe kickstart some resonance. His grin was lopsided, the wit masking the worry lines etched deeper since the blackout. Elena waited, the weight of command settling heavier in the quiet. The crew of 20 relied on her call. Losing sound meant losing cohesion, the subtle cues that bound them. She straightened. "Do it. But keep it low yield. We test on the edge of the field first." They moved to the engineering bay, the corridors echoing with their footsteps, the last natural rhythm aboard. Jax worked fast, his hands a blur as he spliced cables and calibrated dials. Mira monitored from the side, her brow furrowed, inputting variables that danced like fireflies on her display. Elena watched, the air thick with unspoken tension. This pulse was their Hail Mary, a human echo flung into the silence to see if anything echoed back. The ship shuddered as the emitters fired. A low thrum built, then peaked, Elena's voice recorded from briefing looping in a simple phrase, "We are here." The wave rippled out, invisible but felt in the deck's vibration. For a moment hope flickered, the sensors twitched, registering a faint harmonic bounce. Then the alarms blared, harsh, piercing, the first true sound in days. But it wasn't triumph. Myra's tablet lit up with warnings, feedback loop detected. The pulse had interacted with the nebula's edge, not awakening it but agitating it. Ionized particles surged back, slamming into the hull like a silent storm made audible. "Shut it down." Elena barked, lunging for the override. Jax was already there, yanking levers, but the damage rippled through systems. Lights flickered and the ship's hum stuttered, dropping to a whisper. Worse, the comms panel sparked, then went dead, isolating sections of the vessel. Myra's voice trembled as she scanned the readouts. The nebula's responding, it's absorbing our output, converting it into a damping field. We're pulling it closer. Elena steadied herself against the bulkhead, the adventure turning sharper, the void's grip tightening. They had stirred the beast, and now it hungered for their last notes. Jax met her gaze, his wits subdued. Plan B then? Time to get creative. As the ship veered, the nebula swelled in the view screen, a maw of muted colors swallowing the stars. The cost was clear. Silence wasn't just coming, it was here, and it demanded adaptation or oblivion. The stars outside the viewport stretched into an endless, mocking silence, their light piercing the void without a whisper. It had been 3 weeks since the anomaly hit, the ripple that stripped sound from the universe, turning every hum of the engines into a ghost of vibration she could feel in her bones but never hear. The crew of the Odyssey had adapted, mostly with haptic interfaces and visual signals, but the weight of it pressed on her like an unspoken accusation. Jax slid into the compartment behind her, his boots scraping faintly against the deck plating, another illusion her nerves tricked her into perceiving. He tapped her shoulder twice, the signal for status check. She turned, forcing a nod, and pulled up the holographic display on her wrist unit. The schematics for the acoustic resonator flickered to life, lines of code pulsing in blue. We almost had it last cycle, Jax signed, his fingers quick and exaggerated for emphasis. His usual grin was absent, replaced by the tight lines of frustration around his eyes. The modulator synced for a full minute. If we tweaked the frequency dampeners, a sharp vibration rattled through the deck, cutting him off. Alarms blared in silence on the panels, red lights strobing like frantic heartbeats. Mira burst through the hatch, her face pale under the emergency glow, signing wildly, "Breach in Sector 4. Containment failing." Elena's stomach dropped. Sector 4 housed the prototype array, their last hope for piercing the silence with a human voice, a song even to rally the scattered colonies. She bolted for the corridor, Jax and Mira on her heels. The ship groaned under their feet, a tremor that built like thunder she couldn't hear. They reached the access panel, seals hissing open with pressurized puffs of air that tickled their skin. Inside, sparks flew from ruptured conduits, illuminating the chaos. The resonator core, a gleaming cylinder etched with fractal patterns, tilted precariously, coolant leaking in slow, silvery rivulets that danced weightless in the low gravity. "Stabilize it," Elena barked, though the words died in her throat. She grabbed a harness from the wall and clipped in, gesturing for Jax to do the same. He nodded, diving toward the control console, his hands flying over the manual overrides. Mira worked the emergency valves, her movements precise but trembling, rerouting power from auxiliary systems. The core shuddered, a deep thrum vibrating up Elena's arms as she wedged a support beam into place. For a moment, it held. The schematics on her display showed alignment at 87%. Hope flickered, sharp and fragile. Then the floor buckled. A secondary rupture split the bulkhead, hurling debris in a silent explosion. Jax's console shorted, flames licking at his gloves before the autosuppressant foam burst forth in a muffled cloud. He staggered back, signing, "It's gone," cores fracturing. Elena lunged, pulling him clear as the beam she braced snapped. The core toppled, crashing against the far wall with a force that slammed her into the grating. Pain bloomed in her side, but she ignored it, hauling Jax toward the hatch. Mira was already there, wrestling the door mechanism, her cautious nature yielding to raw determination. They tumbled into the corridor as the compartment sealed behind them, the vibration of the collapse echoing through the ship like a distant drum. Elena leaned against the wall, breath ragged, watching the status feed. Resonator offline, power reserves at 42%. The anomaly had taken more than sound, it was unraveling their world, piece by silent piece. Jax coughed, wiping foam from his face, and met her gaze. His fingers formed a single word, regroup. But in his eyes, Elena saw the doubt creeping in, the first real crack in their resolve. The colonies were waiting for a signal, a note to bridge the void. If they couldn't rebuild, the silence would claim them all. Ilera gripped the console, her knuckles whitening against the cold metal as the ship's alarms flickered in silent protest. No blare, no wail, just the red lights pulsing like a heartbeat in the void. The nebula ahead loomed, a swirling mass of gas and dust that swallowed every frequency they'd thrown at it. Sound didn't travel here, it was as if the cosmos had muted itself, leaving their voices to echo uselessly in helmets and corridors. "Captain, the probe's not responding," Jack said, his voice crackling through the comms link. He floated in the engineering bay below, tools drifting lazily around him like forgotten thoughts. Jax was the cautious one, always double-checking seals and calibrating twice over, but even he couldn't hide the edge in his tone now. "I rerouted power to the acoustic emitters, but it's like dropping a stone in black water." "Nothing." Ilara nodded, though he couldn't see it. She glanced at Mira, who hovered nearby, her fingers dancing over a holographic display. Mira, the musician-turned-xenolinguist, had been the one to suggest the sound-based approach in the first place. Vibrations to map the nebula's hidden currents, harmonies to resonate with whatever alien tech might lurk inside. Her dark eyes were sharp, undimmed by the failure, but Ilara saw the tension in her jaw. "We push forward," Ilara decided, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. She was the brave one, or so the crew joked, the human who charged into the unknown when others hesitated. Manual navigation. Jax, prep the auxiliary thrusters. Mira, sync the emitters to our hull vibrations. Make the ship sing if you have to. The plan had seemed solid back in the planning sims. Use sound waves to echolocate safe paths through the nebula, avoiding the magnetic storms that had shredded 3 Alliance scouts already. But as the harmony edged closer, the first backfire hit. A low-frequency pulse from Myra's emitters rippled out, and the ship shuddered. Not a gentle hum, but a violent tremor that rattled loose panels and sent sparks flying from the NAV console. "Feedback loop," Jax shouted, his comms distorting into a garble before clearing. "The nebula's amplifying it, bouncing it back threefold. We're resonating with the damn thing." Ilara's hands flew across the controls, killing the emitters. The ship stabilized, but not before a structural groan echoed through the decks, a sound that shouldn't have been audible in the vacuum, yet it was trapped and magnified inside their fragile shell. Mira cursed under her breath, pulling up diagnostics. "It's not just amplification. The nebula's absorbing the harmonics, rewriting them. Our probe signal is mutating, turning into something else." On the view screen, the probe's icon blinked erratically, its telemetry data twisting into nonsensical patterns. What had been a simple ping now registered as a chorus of overlapping tones, alien and discordant, like an orchestra tuning in reverse. Ilara felt a chill. This wasn't a technical failure. The nebula was alive, or at least responsive, feeding on their ingenuity and spitting back a mockery. "Abort the probe," Ilara ordered. "Reel it in before it drags us with it." But even as she spoke, the ship lurched again. The mutated signal had latched onto their systems, infiltrating the life support. Air recyclers hummed erratically, and a faint, off-key whine seeped from the vents, sound bleeding into places it had no right to be. Jax's voice cut through, strained. "Captain, the lines are fraying. If we pull back now, we lose the probe and half our sensor array. But if we stay..." He trailed off, the unspoken risk hanging heavy. The storms inside could tear them apart, leaving no trace for the colonies back home. Mira leaned in, her face illuminated by the flickering hollow. "We adapt. Layer the frequencies, use dissonance to disrupt the feedback. It's like jamming a bad note into a symphony. Humans have done it with worse." Ilara met her gaze, weighing the cost. One more push, and they might map a path through, securing the first safe route to the inner core where the Lost Alliance fleet was rumored trapped. Fail, and the Harmony joined them, silent ghosts in a forgotten cosmos. She exhaled, the decision settling like grit in her teeth. "Do it." Jax reinforced the hull. "We're not backing down yet." As the ship inched forward once more, the nebula's glow deepened, tendrils of gas reaching out like fingers testing a string. The first dissonant pulse fired, and the void trembled in response, not with anger but curiosity. Ilara held her breath, the weight of their human stubbornness pressing against the infinite quiet. The dim glow of the auxiliary lights flickered across the bridge of the Harmony's echo, casting long shadows that danced like forgotten melodies on the bulkheads. Captain Alara Voss gripped the armrest of her chair, her knuckles white against the worn leather. She was the steady one, always had been, methodical, unyielding, the kind of leader who turned chaos into checklists. Beside her, Jax Harlan hunched over the console, his fingers flying across the holographic interface, sweat beading on his brow despite the recycled air's chill. Jax was the spark, the improviser, quick with a quip even when the odds stacked against them like a collapsing waveform. "We've got incoming distortions," Jax muttered, his voice tight but laced with that defiant edge. "The silence field is compressing, it's like the void squeezing us in a vice. If we don't reroute power to the emitters soon, it'll shred the hull." Alara nodded, her eyes scanning the readouts. The mission had started simple enough. A diplomatic outreach to the silent collectives of the Orion Arm, where species communicated in pulses of light and data streams, blind to the symphonies humans wove into their souls. But the cosmos had other plans. Some ancient anomaly, a relic from a war long faded, had stripped sound from the stars, vibrations snuffed out like candles in a storm. Ships fell mute, comms died, and now the echo was adrift in a bubble of enforced quiet, where even the hum of engines felt like a distant memory. Below decks, in the engineering bay, Dr. Lena Kai wrestled with the jury-rigged sonic resonator. She was the quiet force, analytical to a fault, her mind a lattice of equations that bent reality just enough to keep them alive. Tools clattered silently in the vacuum of sound, but she felt the vibrations through her gloves, the faint tremor of the ship's frame protesting. "Come on," she whispered to herself, though no one could hear. The resonator was their Hail Mary, a human invention, pieced together from scavenged alien tech and raw ingenuity, designed to punch a hole through the silence with a burst of harmonic resonance. A sharp jolt rocked the ship, and Alara braced as alarms flashed in mute crimson. Jax's plan from the last cycle had backfired. The initial probe into the anomaly's edge had amplified the field instead of disrupting it, drawing ethereal tendrils of null vibration toward them like predators scenting blood. Now those tendrils coiled closer, their invisible pressure buckling the outer plating. "Lena, status?" Alara signed rapidly into the comm panel, the gestures frantic but precise. The response came as a text overlay on her screen. Asterisk resonator at 72%. Overload risk high. Need 5 more minutes. Asterisk 5 minutes in a soundless hell was an eternity. Jax slammed a fist on the console, his face a mask of frustration. "We can't just sit here. If I vent the auxiliary plasma, it might buy us a buffer, create a false echo to distract the field." Alara shot him a look, her caution warring with necessity. Venting plasma meant sacrificing their backup drive, stranding them deeper in uncharted space if they survived. But the alternative was disintegration, piece by silent piece. "Do it," she signed, her decision etched in the set of her jaw. Jax initiated the sequence, his hand steady now, channeling that restless energy into action. The ship shuddered as the vents hissed open, inaudible, but the deck plates vibrated underfoot, a ghost of thunder. On the sensors, the plasma bloom unfurled like a silent firework, scattering the tendrils momentarily. It was a human trick, born of desperation, turning waste into weapon, noise from nothing. In the bay, Lena felt the shift, a brief easing in the pressure like a held breath released. She redlined the resonator, ignoring the warning glyphs flashing in her visor. Circuits whined without sound, heat blooming in her suit as the device thrummed to life. The core pulsed, a single defiant note building within, not just frequency but rhythm, the heartbeat of a species that sang its way through the dark. Alara watched the feed from engineering, her breath catching as the resonator's output spiked. The tendrils recoiled, fracturing against the invisible wave. But victory came at a cost. The overload cascaded, frying secondary systems. Lights dimmed further, and the ship's artificial gravity flickered, sending tools floating in lazy arcs. Jax hooped silently, pumping a fist, but Alara's gaze lingered on the damage logs. Their path home was narrower now, fuel margins razor-thin, and the anomaly loomed larger, as if angered by the intrusion. Lena emerged from the bay, her face smeared with conductive gel, signing wearily, "Asterisk it's holding but the resonator's brittle." One more push like that and we lose it. Asterisk the crew gathered on the bridge, a tight knot of exhaustion and resolve. Ilara traced a finger along the star map, plotting their next vector. A risky slingshot around a rogue pulsar, hoping its natural pulses could amplify their signal. Jax grinned faintly, sketching improvisations on his datapad, while Lena cross-checked the math. In the silence, their bond hummed unspoken, humans weaving sound from silence, one vibration at a time. But as the ship lurched forward into the void, Ilara couldn't shake the image of the anomaly's core, a yawning maw hungry for the music they refused to surrender. Ilara's fingers trembled as she adjusted the makeshift resonator, its coils humming faintly against the ship's dim emergency lights. The chamber around her was a tomb of silenced machinery, every gear and panel stripped bare by their frantic scavenging. Jax crouched nearby, his brow furrowed in concentration, wiping grease from his hands onto his worn jumpsuit. "This better work," he muttered, voice rough from days of shouting over the void's eerie quiet. "We've got one shot before the hull integrity drops another notch." The external challenge had escalated since the initial breach, crystalline fissures spiderwebbing across the hull, born from the cosmic anomaly that had stolen all sound from the universe. No alarms wailed, no engines roared, only the subtle vibrations through the deck plates warned them of impending doom. Lena, ever the cautious one, paced the narrow corridor outside, her scanner clutched like a talisman. She was the group's anchor, her sharp eyes catching details the others missed, but doubt gnawed at her now. "If we overload the core we're done," she called softly, her words carrying unnaturally far in the muffled air. "No second chances out here." Jax shot her a wry grin, his wit a shield against the tension. "Then we don't overload it. We finesse it." He connected the final wire, and a low thrum built in the resonator, the first true vibration they'd coaxed from the ship in weeks. Ilara held her breath, watching the needle on the makeshift gauge flicker to life. It was their plan B, repurposing the old acoustic amplifiers from the entertainment deck to generate a localized sound field, a bubble of noise to stabilize the fissures. But the early attempt hours ago had backfired spectacularly, sending harmonic shocks that widened the cracks instead of sealing them. Now, with the ship's oxygen recyclers faltering and their supplies dwindling to ration sips, the stakes pressed in like the cold vacuum beyond. Ilara remembered the anomaly's arrival, a silent wave that erased music, speech, even the rush of wind on forgotten worlds. Humanity's ships, once alive with chatter and song, drifted like ghosts. Their crew of 4, down from 12 after the initial panic, had jury-rigged survival from ingenuity alone. But this was their Hail Mary. "Starting the sequence," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. She was the brave one, the engineer who'd volunteered for the away team that never returned, her optimism a quiet fire. The resonator pulsed, sending ripples through the air that they could feel in their bones. Jax monitored the hull readings, his cautious nods the only encouragement. Outside, Lena's scanner beeped silently, a visual alert flashing red. "Fissures spreading starboard," she reported, slipping back into the chamber. "We need more power." Jax cursed under his breath, slamming a fist on the console. The plan was failing again, the sound field too weak to counter the anomaly's damping effect. Ilara's mind raced, sifting through half-remembered schematics. The auxiliary batteries, from the med bay. We route them through the vents. It was risky. Those batteries powered their last dose of synth nutrients, the only thing keeping starvation at bay. Lena hesitated, her eyes flicking between them. "That leaves us without food for another cycle. We might not last the repair." But Jax was already moving, grabbing the toolkit. Better hungry and alive than silent and dead. Together, they tore into the panels, Ilara's hands steady as she spliced the lines. The air grew thicker with recycled staleness, the vibrations intensifying into a palpable hum that made their teeth ache. As the new power surged, the resonator sang, a discordant melody that echoed through the ship like a forgotten lullaby. The fissures halted, then began to knit, crystalline edges glowing faintly under the strain. Ilara leaned against the wall, sweat beading on her forehead, while Jax let out a whoop that carried like thunder in the reborn space. Lena smiled for the first time in days, her caution yielding to relief. But the triumph was bittersweet. The batteries were drained and, with them, their margin for error. The anomaly still loomed, a silent predator in the stars, and their sound bubble was fragile, a temporary ward against the quiet. As the ship steadied its course toward the nearest relay station, Ilara wondered if the cosmos would ever remember the music, or if they'd have to sing it back themselves, note by defiant note. Ilara's fingers trembled as she adjusted the resonator's dials, the faint hum from the device the only sound in the dim cockpit besides the ragged breaths of her crew. Jax leaned over her shoulder, his usual wry grin absent, replaced by a furrowed brow that spoke of hours without sleep. "It's holding but barely," he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. The void outside the viewport stretched endlessly, stars mocking their isolation with their silent blaze. Mira paced the narrow aisle, her cautious nature fraying at the edges. She'd always been the one to double-check seals and ration air, but now her steps echoed too loudly in the recycled atmosphere. "We can't keep pushing it like this." The feedback loops eating through the harmonics. "One spike and we're done." Her voice carried the weight of their dwindling options, the cosmic silence that had swallowed humanity's songs, leaving only echoes in their machines. The challenge had started as a salvage run, a desperate bid to harvest sonic crystals from an abandoned relay station. But the station's defenses, automated and unyielding, had triggered a silence wave, muting not just their comms but the very vibrations that powered their ship, the Echo's lament. Now, adrift in the nebula's haze, they faced resource starvation. No music meant no propulsion resonance, no shields, no life support rhythm. The cost was already tallied. One crewman lost to the void when the wave hit, his screams unheard. Ilara straightened, her brave resolve shining through as she locked eyes with Jax. "We adapt or we fade. Remember the old Earth tunes? Improvise." She tapped a sequence into the console, blending salvaged frequencies into a makeshift melody. The resonator whirred, sparks flying as it fought the silence. Jax nodded, grabbing a toolkit. "Right. I'll reroute the auxiliary vents, force a backbeat." He dove under the panel, tools clanging in sharp bursts against the metal. Mira hesitated, then joined him, her hands steadying the cables. Tension coiled in the air, the ship's frame groaning under the strain. A low vibration built, tentative at first like a whisper in a storm. The nebulous colors sharpened through the viewport, the crystal's faint glow responding. But then, a hitch. The resonator stuttered, the improvised tune fracturing. Alarms blared silently in their suits, vibrations rattling bones. "Overload." Mira shouted, pulling Jax back as flames licked the edges of the console. Ilara slammed the emergency cutoff, the ship lurching into stillness. Smoke curled lazily, the acrid scent biting at their lungs. Their early plan, clever as it seemed, had backfired, draining the last reserves. In the quiet aftermath, Ilara's mind raced. The cosmos had forgotten music, but humans remembered. "We strip it down," she said finally, voice steady. "Bare bones. One frequency. Our voices." Jax met her gaze, a spark of camaraderie igniting. Mira exhaled, nodding. They linked arms, humming a raw human harmony into the mic. Imperfect, gritty, but alive. The resonator flickered back to life, weaker but persistent. The ship inched forward, the nebula parting just enough. Victory wasn't triumphant fanfare. It was this, a fragile note against the void, with the shadow of exhaustion lingering in their eyes. Ilara gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles whitening against the cold metal. The dim glow of the auxiliary lights cast long shadows across the engineering bay, where cables snaked like veins over the floor. She'd been awake for 36 hours straight, fueled by stimpaks and sheer stubbornness, but now doubt crept in like the silence that had swallowed their world. The harmonic resonator hummed faintly, or was that just her imagination? No, it was real, a vibration she felt in her teeth more than heard. "Status on the quantum weave?" Jax asked, his voice a rough whisper through the comms patch they jury-rigged from salvaged parts. He was down in the lower decks, wrestling with the power relays that kept their makeshift symphony alive. Jax, ever the pragmatist, had insisted on redundancy checks every hour. His caution had saved them twice already from overloads that could have ripped the ship apart. Elara glanced at the flickering readout, holding at 70%. But the flux is unstable, it's like the cosmos is pushing back. She tapped a sequence into the panel, her fingers dancing with the precision of someone who'd once tuned violins by feel. The resonator was their Hail Mary, a device born from human lore, blending ancient acoustics with stellar physics to force sound waves through the void. If it worked, it could pierce the great silence, reconnecting them to the scattered colonies. If it failed, the energy backlash might silence them permanently. A jolt rocked the ship, and alarms blared in silent fury, visual strobes flashing red. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs. "Jax. Lower decks, report." Static crackled, then his voice cut through, edged with strain. "Relays frying. Something's interfering, gravitic echo from that nebula we skirted. It's amplifying the feedback loop." He paused, the sound of sparks hissing in the background. "We abort now or we lose the whole array." She bit her lip, tasting blood. Abort meant starting over, weeks of calibration down the drain, and with supplies dwindling they couldn't afford it. But pushing forward? That was suicide. The crew, 30 souls including Mira, the composer who'd sketched the resonator's core patterns from half-remembered symphonies, depended on this. Elara thought of Myra's quiet determination, how she'd hummed melodies into the design schematics when words failed. "No," Elara decided, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We adapt. Reroute the secondary coils through the cargo bay vents, use the hull resonance to dampen the echo." It was a gamble, pulling from old Earth shipyard tricks, but humans had always bent rules like that. Jax grunted approval. "On it. Mira, you hearing this? Need your patterns tweaked for the vent harmonics." Up in the observation deck, Mira floated weightless, her tablet glowing with fractal scores. She'd been the one to notice the silence wasn't total. Faint pulses in the stars, like forgotten rhythms. "Adjusting now," she replied, her tone light but focused. The wit that had kept morale from crumbling now sharpened into purpose. Her fingers flew, reshaping the weave to echo the ship's own structure, turning the vessel into an unwitting instrument. The ship shuddered again, harder this time, metal groaning under the strain. Elara braced as a panel sparked nearby, singeing her sleeve. Heat bloomed in her arm, but she ignored it, slamming the override. The resonator's hum deepened, threading through the interference like a needle. For a moment, nothing. Then a low thrum built, vibrating the air, the first true sound in months. "It's stabilizing," Jax called, triumph edging his words. "Flux dropping. We're through the echo." Elara exhaled, slumping against the console. But the victory felt fragile. The readout showed the nebula's pull strengthening, dragging at their orbit. They'd bought time, but the cost was mounting. Power reserves at critical, and Myra's latest scan hinted at distortions ahead, pockets of void that could shred the weave entirely. As the thrum settled into a tentative melody, Elara wondered if their ingenuity would outpace the cosmos's indifference, or if the silence would claim one more verse. Elara's fingers trembled as she adjusted the resonator's core, the faint hum of recycled air the only sound in the chamber. It wasn't music, not yet, but it was something, a whisper against the void that had swallowed their world. Kai leaned against the bulkhead, his alien eyes narrowed in that cautious squint she knew too well, while Jax paced the narrow corridor outside, his boots scraping softly on the grated floor. The ship's hull groaned under the strain of the nebula's gravitational pull, a reminder that their gamble was fraying at the edges. "We can't push it harder," Kai said, his voice a low rumble through the translator implant. "The harmonics are destabilizing. One surge and the whole array fractures." Elara shot him a glance, her brave streak flaring despite the sweat beading on her brow. "We didn't come this far to whisper. The cosmos forgot music because it feared us, our rhythm, our chaos. If we stop now, humanity stays silent forever." She twisted the dial a fraction more, watching the readouts flicker. The device, cobbled from salvaged Xenotech and human ingenuity, was meant to seed sound waves into the silent ether, a beacon to rally scattered colonies. But the nebula fought back, its ionized storm scrambling the signals like a jealous guardian. Jax burst in then, his witty grin undercut by the pallor of his face. "Bad news from the scopes. That rival probe's closing, Vertari scouts, no doubt. They're jamming our emissions and if they board. He trailed off, flexing his hands as if itching for a fight that might cost them everything. The plan had been simple at the outset. Infiltrate the nebula's heart, where the cosmic silence originated from some ancient dampening field, and overload it with a symphony of human noise. Songs from old Earth archives, layered with engineered frequencies to pierce the veil. But the early attempt had backfired spectacularly. Their initial burst had drawn the Vortari, those sound-hating enforcers of the Galactic Accord, who saw humanity's auditory rebellion as a threat to universal peace. Now, with resources dwindling and the ship's power reserves at critical, failure meant not just silence, but erasure. Colonies cut off, cultures fading into quiet oblivion. Elara nodded, her mind racing. We adapt. Kai, reroute the auxiliary generators to the secondary emitters. Jax, get to the airlock. Prep the decoy drone with a loop distress signal, something erratic to mimic a failing human wreck. Her voice steadied as she spoke, the words pulling her team into motion. Kai hesitated only a beat before complying, his cautious nature yielding to the grit of the moment. He muttered something in his native tongue about reckless primates, but his claws moved deftly over the panels. As Jax dashed out, Elara sealed the core access, the resonator's innards glowing with bottled energy. A sharp crackle escaped, a single note, pure and defiant, echoing briefly before the nebula's hush smothered it. Her heart pounded. This was it, the final amplification. If the decoy bought them time, they could flood the field with a cascade of sound, shattering the silence from within. But as the ship lurched, alarms blaring in staccato bursts, Elara felt the cost pressing in. Kai's homeworld alliance hung by this thread. One wrong frequency and he'd be branded a traitor. Jax's family on the outer rim waited for a signal that might never come. And she, well, the weight of Earth's lost melodies rested on her shoulders, a legacy turned weapon. The probe's shadow loomed on the external feeds, its sleek form cutting through the swirling gases like a blade. Jax's voice crackled over the comm. Drone away. They're taking the bait, veering off course. Tension coiled in Elara's chest, released in a held breath. Kai synced the emitters, his movements precise. Now, he said. She triggered the sequence. The resonator thrummed to life, vibrations rippling through the deck plates. Faint at first, then building, a melody from an old violin concerto woven with percussive beats and vocal harmonies pulled from human history. It pushed outward, clashing against the nebula's barrier. Sparks flew from the consoles, the ship shuddering as the dampening field resisted, pushing back with invisible force. Elara gripped the edge, watching the wave propagate. Cracks appeared in the silence, tiny fractures where sound bled through. But the Vortari probe recovered, firing a suppression pulse that slammed into their hull. Lights dimmed, systems flickering. It's holding barely, Kai reported, sweat glistening on his scaled brow. In that instant, as the music swelled against the storm, Elara realized the lingering scar this would leave. Victory, if it came, would echo with the ghosts of what they'd risked. The fractured alliances, the homes left vulnerable in the quiet. Yet they pressed on, three souls weaving noise from nothing, one defiant chord at a time. The stars wheeled above the fractured hull of the Odyssey, a silent ballet against the void. Elara gripped the console, her fingers slick with sweat, as the final harmonics pulsed through the ship's core. The device hummed, no, it sang, a low vibration that resonated in her bones, chasing away the emptiness that had cloaked humanity's exodus for cycles. Beside her, Jax leaned forward, his usual grin fractured by exhaustion, eyes fixed on the readouts flickering green for the first time in what felt like lifetimes. It's holding, he muttered, voice rough from disuse. Not silence, exactly. The cosmos had stolen sound, muting transmissions, engines, even heartbeats in the eerie quiet. But this was different. The resonator they jury-rigged from salvaged Xenotech and human stubbornness was bridging the gap, threading music back into the ether. Mira, ever the cautious one, monitored the external feeds from the auxiliary station. Her hands danced over controls, precise as a conductor's baton. Radiation levels dropping. The anomalies retracting. She didn't look up, but Elara caught the tremor in her words, the unspoken weight of their gamble. They'd lost the forward bays to the void storm and with them half the colony seed stock. No speeches about sacrifice, just the cold math of survival. The ship shuddered once, a final groan as the fabric of space knit itself anew. Jax punched a fist into his palm, the impact muffled but real. We did it. Humanity's got its voice back. He glanced at Alara, the brave spark in his eyes dimmed but unquenched. What now? Broadcast the symphony? Alara nodded, initiating the sequence. The first notes, Beethoven's Fifth, warped through alien filters, rippled outward, a defiant clarion into the stars. Responses flickered in, distant probes pinging acknowledgement, the faint chorus of rediscovered outposts. But not all. The logs showed voids where signals should have been, colonies silenced forever by the cosmic hush. Mira finally turned, her face etched with lines that hadn't been there yesterday. It's not whole. We can't bring them back. Her voice cracked, the first real sound of grief in months. Jax slung an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Then we make new music. For the ones we can reach. He looked to Alara, waiting. She straightened, the weight of command settling like an old friend. The Odyssey limped toward the nearest habitable rim, engines whispering promises. Music filled the corridors now, a fragile thread weaving through the crew's steps. They'd adapted as humans always did, clever patches over broken dreams, but the cost lingered in empty bunks and scarred bulkheads. Triumph tasted bittersweet, a melody unresolved, echoing into the infinite.